Side Jordan Sack. I'm Miles Grossman, and Jordan, both these teams haven't been around for too long, just a couple years to be exact, year two. And with both of these programs having program builders at the helm in 2025, just looking to take a step forward and look for a bit more of a polished product.
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing that we're going to see with both of these universities is that the fact that they're so freshman heavy, because as you mentioned, they've only been around for 2 years, so they're so freshman and sophomore heavy, which is extremely impressive, coming in and really being a stronghold of both teams and coming out onto this mat, especially with this sport that is so diversified.
Absolutely. A couple program builders at the helm. First and foremost, Shelby Armstrong in year two, leading the LIU Sharks. Known to be a quote-unquote program builder, as I said, began her career at Davis and Elkins College before a stop at Mars Hill University and then a stop at her alma mater for a short time as an assistant, and then back here at the Division I level. You have to like a lot about the career of Shelby Armstrong. Very ambitious.
Absolutely. Even as an athlete, Shelby was just incredible. She was a tumbler, she was a top, she mid-base in her time too, so really bringing all of her strengths that she had as an athlete into coaching has just been so impressive to see.
And then another Oregon alum, another former Duck at the helm of the Iona squad, Jackie Eshelman, Oregon class of 2010. Her history includes a stint at Gannon where she was the head coach, and now here also at Iona. Top 15 matchup. LIU 14 in the coaches poll coming into this one, and Iona a top 8 squad, and we're underway here for our compulsory events. This one will consist of 4 heats: acro, pyramid, toss, and tumbling. And of course, this is really the nuts and bolts of acrobatics and tumbling.
Absolutely. So what you're going to see here, it's both teams mirroring each other. It's apples to apples. So both teams are going to compete the exact same thing. And the compulsory event in itself is out of 40 points. So all start values are out of 10, which we can go into a little bit later, more in detail with that. But what you're going to see here is Iona's taking the mat. They're the visitors here. LIU is the home team, so they're going to be taking the mat first in every heat that we're going to see throughout the day. And it's really important in this compulsory event. Like you said, it's the nuts and bolts. It's really starting us off with what we're going to see later, the more difficulty, the more creativity that we're going to see throughout the day. Within this event, so what you just saw was compulsory acro. And I can tell you in any sport, the first man up or the first event up is probably the most nerve-wracking. And Iona just went out there and really started off this competition really, really well. They went out there and really solidified their position and the way through their entire meet. So these skills that you're actually going to see are predetermined by the NCATA compulsory committee, and they're revised every 3 years as the sport grows. So when I was an athlete in this sport, some of these skills were actually a little bit different when I was on the mat.
And of course, a relatively young sport overall. Would you say that it's still sort of in that developmental stage?
I would say it's in that developmental stage, but I would also say that the amount of growth that they've had in such a short time is impeccable. They've gotten so many universities, they've really gotten so many athletes, and a lot of these athletes, they don't just come from gymnastics or cheerleading, they come from diving, they come from power tumbling, and they come from the acrobatic sport that itself. So it's really so incredible to see such a diversified group of athletes come in and make one sport.
And for those viewing at home who may be wondering about this pause, of course, Iona makes their debut, and then now this is the opportunity for it to be scored before LIU answers.
Absolutely. So there's actually 3 officials on the panel. So there's actually going to be an official that's going to look at the bases, and then another official that looks at the top, and then the third official actually looks at the whole thing as a whole. And then when we have that team event, which is going to be the last heat, which will be a ways away from here, it will be a little bit different of a setup, which we can explain later.
So as you said, Iona debuts out there in the acrobatics, and now LIU for the first time here in 2025.
So what the officials are really looking for here is the stability of those bases, and specifically in that skill, they're also looking for the height of those back tucks. This is also a different skill which you're going to see in a diversified events. You might see it in pyramids, you can also see it in acro rounds, but there with those tops, they're really looking for their legs to be above their hip length. So looking for that flexibility, and here they're looking for that stability as I mentioned before.
So pretty crisp throughout.
Absolutely. Really great job by the Sharks. I saw a little bit of a bobble in that last sequence of the compulsory acro, so that will be a minor deduction, but other than that, really great job. So the next compulsory event we're going to see is the compulsory pyramid. And the pyramid is going to consist of 2 groups from each team. As I mentioned before, 10 possible points. And we're going to see the same exact thing from Iona that we're going to see from LIU Sharks. And to really hone in more on these officials, a few things that they're going to be watching for is the continuity of all the skills, the balance, 3-second holds of the skills, strong catches, and solid landings. So those 3-second holds, you see how those structures kind of stop and pause in the air. Those officials are looking for that. And if it's not a 3-second hold, then maybe it's 2, or maybe they unfortunately fall before they can get there. That is a deduction. A lot of the primary purpose of this compulsory event and the skills themselves is really safety. So they're going to allow for the safe progression of the skill difficulty, which we'll see when we come into that acro heat and we get into the pyramids and the tosses as well. So it's really, as we mentioned before, the building blocks and setting those safety skills to be able to progress a little bit more.
So if you're just joining us here on NEC Front Row, we're through the first portion here of the compulsory event. Of course, acro in the books for each side, and now in just a few moments we'll be underway. Iona set to go out there for the pyramid.
So another thing to note too, as you're watching some of these events, you're going to see that athlete right in the middle of both groups there. She's actually a counter. So she makes sure that both teams are kind of going on the same counts and making sure that there's no lack in timing, because a lack in timing can be another deduction. So that athlete is absolutely allowed on the mat, even though they're not really doing any of the skills.
Sort of that player's coach, if you will.
Absolutely. She is that sole voice you're listening to make sure that you know when to go, the bases know when to go, and also, more importantly, especially in this skill, the tops know when to come off of that base.
So Iona in good spirits now after that quick one, and once again, very crisp early.
Absolutely, and Coach Jackie, she has been such an incredible coach. She has, as you mentioned, built up 2 really, really great teams, and she's really doing the same with Iona. And I know from watching her throughout this sport, she is all about crisp, she is all about clean, and she's always about stability. And you really see that those athletes really hone in on that when they're going to the competition mat.
And one thing that I found quite interesting about head coach Jackie Eshelman, she comes from Gannon, and she also brings over a very talented All-American transfer from Gannon. Ty Upton will be out there, and ahead of this 2025 season, really one of the headliners of the Gale squad.
Absolutely, and Ty's going to come over as a leader too, as someone who is a junior this year and an All-American. She brings those leadership skills, especially for a program that's only 2 years old and is mainly a freshman and sophomore base class.
So now LIU's turn at the pyramid here. Round 2, the compulsory events.
Something really impressive about pyramids too, it's actually a 3-level structure. So it's 2 bases on the bottom, a mid base, and then that top on top. Really great job by LIU there. Very minimal deductions, so hopefully we'll see that represented from the officials.
So coming up will be the toss and tumbling.
And before we get to those tosses, some things to really focus and for our viewers to really look at is the height of those tosses, the timing of the tosses, and the stability of those catches. So as we just saw from a pyramid, you saw those tops coming off and landing into those 3 bases there. So what the officials are really looking for when it comes to tosses or pyramid catches is no movement. So when that top lands, there is no jerking up and down. and that also the top shoulder and their feet are at the same level. So essentially you want them to be in a plank, a straight position. And if they're not, the officials can take deductions from there.
And safe to say, so far, both young head coaches very pleased with their start to 2025. And coming into this year, of course, very young programs still getting their footing, and had the opportunity to catch up with head coach Shelby Armstrong of LIU ahead of this one. She had to hit the portal an awful lot, 28 transfers coming in, and that's something that she's going to want to steer clear of, she says, moving forward. Of course, when you have to build a program, you have to find names somewhere, but that transfer portal can create a lot of instability, something she's looking to steer clear of moving forward.
Absolutely, and I think when you have a new program, too, as we highlighted, it's a lot of freshmen. So not only are they new to the college atmosphere, they're also new to college athletics, and they're also new to the sport. Some people don't, most athletes aren't from the acrobatics background. So they're learning a new sport, they're learning to adjust to that college life, so it's really impressive.
And Jordan, you can speak on that yourself. I mean, a Quinnipiac acrobatics and tumbling alum yourself, but this was not your first sport as far as I could tell.
Yes, no, I was a gymnast growing up my entire life. And then as I was getting closer to those college years, I had two really instrumental teammates who were really big role models in my life who joined acrobatics and tumbling. So that's how I learned about the sport. And then I've been grateful to, do 4 years at Quinnipiac University. But, and if any of our viewers are really interested in learning more about the sport, please visit the website, the ncata.org. You can find opportunities to be an athlete, to be a coach, to be an official, or to even just get news about the sport in itself. So Iona just completed their compulsory toss. Really great body positions from those tops, really great timing, and really great catches.
So your LIU's turn at the toss.
To talk a little bit more about the structure of these tosses, you have two main bases, a back base, a front base, and then the top themselves.
And you saw Logan Lombardi that time made the catch on the right side of your screen. According to our head coach, really the most versatile athlete on this squad. She can play up top and on the bottom as well.
And I think that's so incredible to know that not only Logan, but there's so many athletes that can be so versatile within this sport. You have people who can be a top, a mid-base, a base, a tumbler, and I think that's really incredible to see how many different avenues you can kind of really take within the sport. Before we head into our last heat of this compulsory event, it's going to be the tumbling heat. So you're going to see 8 student athletes from each team, and this is going to include standing tumbling and running tumbling. So the standing tumbling component is going to be a back tuck, a straddle jump back tuck, a back handspring back tuck, and then they're going to go into that running tumbling portion, which is going to be a round off back handspring layout. So really what the officials are going to be looking for here is not only the form of the skills and the technique of the skills, they're also going to be looking for making sure that there's no steps, no hops, and that they're really, as my coach liked to say, glued to the mat. Sticky feet. You want to make sure that there is absolutely no movement after each of these skills.
Of course, balance the name of the game, but much easier said than done. Also looks from here a lot easier than I'm sure it is.
Really great job by Iona there. You can see their sideline is absolutely fired up. What a great way to end their compulsory heat.
So as you said, the Gales are done with their side of the compulsory events, and now it'll be LIU's turn. And really, so far, Jordan, Iona has really done a great job starting off, not looking nervous whatsoever, and putting the pressure on LIU here at home.
Absolutely, especially to be that away team. It's a different atmosphere. You don't necessarily have a lot of friends and family or fans that come in to see you, so really being that strong to kind of start off the competition is impressive by them.
So after this, we'll have the acro event, which, of course, marks the beginning of the optional portion of the meet. Each team will compete with skills previously chosen and with different possible start values, and I know Jordan will get into those start values in just a little bit.
Yes, so as we talked about before, the compulsory heat, everything starts at a 10. That is the highest possible score you can get on each of these events throughout the competition, except for that last heat, the team routine. But when we get into more of the optional portion of the competition, you get to see more creativity, and you also get to see more of the coach's discretion and their team's strengths, which is really, really incredible, and it's exciting to watch. So you might have a team go out there, maybe not perform a 10.0 difficulty. Maybe they're at a 9.9, a 9.8, or a 9.7, which could just simply mean that it's the beginning of the season, they're not ready to put their most difficult skills out yet, or maybe they went with the cleaner option. They might have another more difficult option, in their vault, as you could say, but they're just not ready to debut, and they don't feel it could be scored as well as something with a little bit of a lower start value, but a cleaner version.
And you'd expect maybe more of a conservative mindset this early in the year, of course, 0-0, just trying to find your identity in 2025.
Absolutely. And there's always new skills coming out every single year that people are creating, they're coming up with, and they're setting to the NCATA committee as well.
Beautifully in sync there, and the Shark bench equally eating it up.
Absolutely. What a way to close out this compulsory heat in our first heat of the night. So as you mentioned, we are going to hit the acro event next. So there's going to be 3 heats in this event, 30 possible points, and it's going to consist of the 5-element heat, the 6-element heat, and the 7-element heat. And each of these can have a group of up to 4 student athletes, but they could also have that counter, which could be the 5th student athlete as well.
So we'll take a quick break here on NEC Front Row, and when we come back, the acro event, it's the Iona Gales and the LIU Sharks.
So with this acro heat, you're going to have a 45-second time limit for each of these heats. So the 5-element, 6-element, 7-element, that 45 seconds doesn't increase as you add more elements. So it gets more difficulty to stay up with that time as you go through. And if you do go over 45 seconds, that could be a deduction the officials take. Create their own sequences here to the meet, and they have the heat requirements allowing teams to select skills based on their strengths. And the overall difficulty comes from the connections of the skills in the sequence or the ability to maintain control, continuity, and stability throughout. So Iona's going to take the mat first, and they're going to start their 5-element heat with a 9.9. So not quite that 10.0, but right there.
And as opposed to some of the numbers we'll see later on, maybe one of the more aggressive.
A really great start to this acro event from the Iona Gales. A couple of those skills that you're going to see there, you saw that one-to-one structure with an assist on the back. So that is one person completely lifting up another person above their head, which is insanely difficult to even think about.
And in that final flip, once again, as you said, sticky feet on the way down, really good balance.
Absolutely, and she did a back layout off of another athlete's shoulders, which is extremely impressive in itself.
So at 9.9, you have to imagine that they were pretty close to executing that to the greatest of their abilities, and now LIU will have to answer.
Absolutely, and that 9.9 could have come from a variety of things. You know, as I mentioned before, maybe they're just starting off the season really clean and crisp and maybe waiting to up that difficulty to that 10.0 later. So as I said, that first skill that they did, that one-to-one, they had an assist on it. Without an assist, that could equal the 10.0. So LIU is going to take the mat here for Acro Heat 1, their 5 element, and they're going to start at a 10.0. So they are maxing out the level of difficulty that they possibly can here.
So Ariana Ardilla on top there, the junior, who her head coach Shelby Armstrong was super excited about coming into 2025.
Absolutely, and what an impressive skill that LIU just put out there for their first heat. That last element that you just showed was a one-to-one hand-in-hand. So it was that one base holding up that top, as you mentioned, number 14, in a handstand. And we talked about that 3-second count earlier, so that top held that handstand for 3 seconds. And I don't know if anybody else, but there is a counter on that mat that kind of shows the official, the 1, 2, 3 that goes on with that structure. And she held that even for longer. I would say it was like about 4 or 5 seconds, and then she came down, which was so impressive. So a really great showing from LIU here.
Yes, very polished for the junior on top there. And Shelby Armstrong put her athlete in a very good spot there. 28 freshmen coming in next year for this LIU Shark program. So previously had to hit the portal. Now really just going to be a whole new crop of fresh faces.
Absolutely, and the one thing I love to watch when the freshmen come in is watching all their personalities mix with the rest of the team. Not only are they bringing in a new skill set for the sport themselves, but really watching the personalities and the leadership and really working with other athletes, because, you know, gymnasts, for the main part, it is an individual sport, so they get to come here and have such a big team atmosphere. Iona's going to take the mat for the 6 element heat, and this is actually going to be 2 groups side by side that need to mirror each other, so timing is going to be extremely important in the 6 element. A little bit of a bobble there on the left side of the structures there, so that will be a deduction since she didn't get to complete that handstand skill, but other than that, a really solid performance by Iona.
I was going to say, really one of the first clear deductions we've seen so far. It's been such a clean day. But now LIU will have the opportunity to sort of capitalize.
So some really big keys to good execution and really good scores and really honing those officials in is going to be the strong body position of the top, the stability from the bases, and maintaining that balance. So as you just saw, the balance was a little bit off there for Iona. But other than that, I saw really, really strong structures from their bases and from their tops as well. Also, for our viewers that aren't necessarily familiar with the sport, there are 2 panels on either side of the competition floor for each team so they can practice in between each heat. They can kind of get warmed up and they can stay warm throughout the competition.
So LIU, of course, all lined up and set to go, just waiting for the results. And they'll have their opportunity at the 6 element synchronized.
So this 6 element has actually changed. This has been a couple years now that they actually do it synchronized. It used to only be 1 group on the mat, and now they made it a little bit more difficulty due to the evolution of the sport, and they actually made it 2 groups. So that structure you saw there, and it's continuing, is a hand-to-hand. They press down, and then they press right back up without coming down to the mat, which is increasingly impressive. And that just goes to show you the strength of this LIU team in those bases. Not only the strength of the bases, they were able to sync that up with 2 different groups and put that on the mat for the officials.
So it's once again Ardilla on the left side in a pivotal role so far for the Sharks. And on the other, McKenna Guidish, the freshman out of British Columbia, in a big spot early, looked really solid there for just a first year. So these Gales making the trip over from New Rochelle this evening. Of course, just starting their 2nd year ever as a program, and they entered the year with a top 10 rating coming in to the campaign, 8 to be exact. And, you know, that really speaks to what they've been able to do in a very short amount of time. Jackie Eshelman has them sort of on a national radar already.
Absolutely, and Jackie is just so essential to the sport. As we've talked about over and over again, she really builds these teams up, and she has such a good base of her acrobatics and tumbling knowledge with gymnastics, with cheerleading, with all the different sports, and she really just recruits so well. So Iona University is going to take the mat, and they're going to start here to 9.95. So we're going to see another one of these handstand structures. And from that hand-to-hand, they are going to press down and automatically pop over to another base for another diverse handstand structure. So one, you had the full extension, and the other one was on top of the shoulders.
So Alyssa Lentz there, the senior, the top / tumbler, gets the job done.
Absolutely, and you saw she was involved in all aspects of that element there. She was the top for that hand-to-hand, that pop over, and then also the top for the final structure for that heat.
And Alyssa Lentz, a player who has jumped around quite a bit, began her career at Mount San Antonio, a junior college in Southern California, and then went over to Hawaii Pacific, one of the other 4 names in the sport in action today. They're on the road at Azusa Pacific, another Southern California name. So Alyssa Lentz, a high pedigree name now, but not always the case, beginning at the Southern California JUCO level.
Absolutely, and as a senior on this team, she's just going to be vital to that leadership. Her and Ty Upton are really going to bring so much experience, and they're really going to be essential in helping these younger teams build their structures. So the Sharks are going to take the mat for the final acro event. That's 7 elements, and they're actually going to start at a 10.0, so the highest level of difficulty.
For the second state time, I mean, they've been pretty aggressive here for their opening meet. And talking to head coach Shelby Armstrong ahead of this one, she says she sees a lot of similarities between herself and the head coach she's facing off against, and Jackie Eshelman. Both Oregon alums, both definitely well attached to the label program builder.
Absolutely. Both dynamic athletes in themselves, really, really made a name for themselves as athletes and are now doing the same as coaches. So that right there was actually a skill we hadn't seen before. She did a full twisting layout off of her base right there, which is something we haven't seen. We've seen back tucks, we've seen layouts, but this is the first time we've seen a full, so extremely impressive by LIU here.
So Ariel beat on top there. Perfectly in control.
Absolutely, and you're going to see Ariel, she did that handstand position. She actually crossed her feet at the top, which is not a deduction. So we've seen a couple different structures there. We've seen legs together, we've seen that cross leg there, and we also saw some where they didn't completely close the straddle. That is actually up to the coach's discretion. It is not a deduction if they get their 3-second hold. So that is actually one of the ways acrobatics and tumbling itself shows its creativity on the mat.
Alrighty, so that will be that for the acro event. You just saw that 7 element on display there. We'll take a quick break. Last event of the first half when we come back. And once again, welcome back inside the Pratt Recreation Center here in Brookville. Miles Grossman alongside Jordan Sack, and we are getting set for the final event of our first half, the pyramid event. Of course, athletes will build a 3-layer structure. The start value is determined prior, and then, of course, there'll be 3 different heats. And heat 2 will be synchronized, and heat 3 will be that open heat.
Absolutely. This pyramid event, it's out of 30 possible points again. So as you mentioned, it's 3 different heats. The inversion heat, which must include an inverted position. The synchronized heat, 2 groups performing identical pyramids. And the open heat, there are no specific requirements. So this is going to allow for the most creativity throughout this pyramid heat. So these pyramids, they're going to include a varying number of student athletes. You can have 5 or 6 athletes there, or you can have up to 10 to 12. It really depends on the type of pyramid and structure that they're going to be performing. So each of these pyramids are going to include an entry, structure, and a dismount, and all 3 are being scored by the officials. So all 3 can lead up to possible deductions throughout the heats. Also, the difficulty is going to come from the combination of each of those. So a harder entry can increase the start value, a harder structure, or a more difficult dismount. And a few things to note while the officials are going to be looking at is the stability of each structure. A hold by the top for 3 seconds, following the entry, and a smooth dismount that ends with either a catch or a landing. So Iona's going to hit the mat here for their first heat, for the inversion heat, and their start value is going to be a 10.0. really great way to start out this pyramid heat for this competition. That was extremely impressive by Iona. They seem extremely happy with it. That structure was, as we mentioned, a 3-level structure with the top up there. The inverted position was that handstand that you see. And if we're going to be nitpicky, the only deduction I saw there was she was a little bit lopsided in that catch, but other than that, really great job.
So, of course, now LIU will be set up for their inversion heat. We'll have that same 45-second time limit.
And they're actually going to start at a 10.0 as well.
It's been par for the course for LIU so far.
Absolutely. Actually, as of this competition, all of their start values have equaled to 10, so they have really maxed out their level of difficulty for this first half.
And one thing, Georgina Morehouse, we saw her return from that torn UCL, so poised for a real comeback season. Have to like that if you're the LIU coaching staff. Ardilla once again, that top name.
Really great job by the Sharks there. We essentially saw two very, very similar pyramids from Iona and from the Sharks there, so the scoring is going to be very close.
So now it'll be the synchronized heat. Iona, of course, up first. Two individual groups performing identical routines.
Absolutely, and Iona's actually going to start at a 10.0 here as well. So we saw a similar setup in the acro heat where that 6 element, that middle heat was synchronized by 2 groups. So they're keeping the same structure here in pyramids, obviously just with a little bit different levels of difficulties and structures.
And this might sound like a little bit of a novice question, but throughout your career, would you agree that the pyramid was one of the more difficult aspects of your individual meets?
Absolutely. Pyramids is actually one of my favorite heats, besides the tumbling, which was kind of my favorite. But pyramids is really great because I think there's so much versatility within it. You can create so many different structures just from a few different people, and I love watching the creativity. I love watching the versatility. So a little bit of a difference here. You're actually going to see Iona is going to be performing their pyramids facing the LIU bench. So there is no deduction for this. This is actually up to the coach's discretion wherever they want to place it on the mat. So all the other heats we've seen have been facing the officials. This is actually sideways.
And from a coach's perspective, the advantage is just from a comfort perspective, I guess?
Comfort perspective, and also, I guess, there's certain things officials might not be able to see from sideways, so they try to do it. It's more, they pick and choose their advantages here.
Absolutely.
So the officials are really going to be honing in on the structure of those tops there. They were in a straddle sit position, so what's really important there is that their feet and their hips are aligned. If their feet are a little bit lower than their hips, that could be a deduction. And also another really important deduction, obviously with that 6 element heat and the synchronized heat, is the timing.
And would you say that might even be on the referee's mind, thinking they're lined up sideways for a particular reason?
Yes.
I see.
Yes, those officials know. I think the judges really try to pick and choose so carefully. The coaches try to pick and choose so carefully where they're going to place things, but the officials know what they're looking for, and they can really see all. They're trained to do that.
And one thing that's going to ring true for two second-year programs is two very young rosters, but Jackie Eshelman, the head coach of Iona, trying to see it as more of an advantage than a limitation.
Absolutely. So actually here, LIU is going to go on an angle here, so they're actually going to face that corner. So both coaches decided to not go with that straight-on approach for the synchronized heat. So once again, very similar pyramids from both of these teams. So the officiating is going to be extremely close there. And also another thing to note here, those dismounts are actually twisting dismounts. So their feet need to be facing the way that they started. Excuse me, the way that they're landing. So if it's a little bit short or a little bit over, that's also a deduction.
So you saw Christina DeVincenzo, the Long Island native out there on the right side, and then Armadillo on the left. Two names that Shelby Armstrong highlighted in our conversation that she was extremely excited about. Of course, DeVincenzo, a local product, competes in really every single event for these Sharks. Super versatile talent.
So for the final heat of this pyramid event is going to be the open heat. Remember, there are no specific requirements, so this is going to show the most creativity and the most strengths from each of these teams. And Iona's going to hit the mat first here and actually start with a 9.9.
So Iona's final heat before halftime in what's been a neck-and-neck first half.
What a great way to close out this pyramid event here from Iona. That structure is probably one of the most impressive structures that we can really see in the pyramid event. You have that mid base standing on top of two other people, but then also doing a full extension of another athlete above her head. Doing that on the floor is extremely difficult, but then doing that standing on top of other people is just really incredible. And the strength of that mid base there is something to really note.
So now once again, it feels like the pressure is sort of back on the Sharks in terms of answering before halftime.
And the Sharks are going to have a slight advantage going into this third heat because their start value is actually at a 10.0. So there is that little bit of a difference there. So let's see what the Sharks have to bring us to close out this pyramid event here.
So Maddie Bradley is the name in the middle, number 27 in white.
Really great job by the Sharks here to close out this first half. You saw, again, very similar pyramids from both of these teams, but the Sharks elected to go with a front-facing, almost blind to the top there, which increased their level of difficulty.
And you saw Maddie Bradley, also known as the strongest base on this LIU team, certainly on display there. But that'll take us to halftime here in Brookville. We'll take a quick break and update the score when we come back. And once again, welcome back inside the Pratt Recreation Center here on the campus of LIU. Miles Grossman alongside Jordan Sack. As you know, it is halftime as the Iona Gales, a top 10 opponent, for the LIU Sharks have made the trip over from New Rochelle. And Jordan, it's been about as tightly contested as a first half can be.
Absolutely, and I am so excited to see what both teams are going to bring in that second half, because that's really where it comes down to the wire, is that toss event, the tumbling event, and that team routine event.
And certainly a couple talented veterans on display. First and foremost, it's really been one name, Ariana Ardilla, holding it down. Now an upperclassman for these LIU Sharks, one of the rare upperclassmen, of course, year 2 of the program. So if you're going to be an upperclassman for the Sharks, I guess it has to be by way of experience elsewhere. But Ardilla's performed very nicely. DiVincenzo as well. And then Maddie Bradley, known to be the strongest base on this LIU team. And she's had a very solid first half of her 2025 debut.
Absolutely, and I think alongside those specialty athletes there, I think both teams have had such a strong debut for their 2025 seasons. Both of them have come out really strong, really clean, and really showing some impressive skills for second-year teams.
And on the other side, Alyssa Lentz has certainly looked like the polished veteran that she is. Began her career at the junior college level and then over to Division II, now over to Iona. Jackie Englishman, pardon me, in year 2 at the helm of the program, certainly has done a fantastic job in terms of recruiting talent from all over the place.
Absolutely, and in this second half, we're going to see a little bit more of a discrepancy in those start values, as we talked about a little bit more. Because when you get to that tumbling event, it gets so difficult to really up those scores. Because there's going to be a combination of synchronized tumbling, there's going to be individual tumbling, and that's where you're going to see that the biggest heat and sometimes the biggest score determiners there.
So even though it might be neck and neck at the moment, things might start to open up here in half number 2, but it looks like both sides out there getting loose. We'll take a quick break once again here on NEC Front Row, and in just a little while, second half action from Brookville. So about 5 minutes from getting underway in half number 2, Jordan Sack alongside Miles Grossman here in Brookville, New York. Of course, Iona's turn to take over the mat and get loose now, but of course, we haven't had the opportunity to add the most recent heat, but as it stands, our updated score 62.8 all, quite literally tied down to the decimal. Pretty spectacular.
That's incredible from both teams themselves, especially with the levels of difficulty and the creativity that all of these teams have shown. To be tied down to the decimal point is so impressive and just really is so exciting to see what, that pyramid heat scores are going to be and what the rest of the competition is going to bring.
And, of course, in just a few moments when we do get underway in that second half, we will get it started with the toss event, which, as you discussed a moment ago, Jordan, first of all, the toss event followed by the tumbling event where things could really start to separate on the scoreboard.
Absolutely. This toss event is going to be 3 different heats. It's going to be 30 possible points. You're going to have a 450 salto heat. You're going to have a synchronized heat, and then you're also going to have an open heat. So it's similar setup to what we saw with pyramids and with the acro heats as well. So the tosses are going to include 3 to 4 bases and 1 top, who's going to execute a twist, a flip, or both in the air before being caught by those bases. Timing is really important in this dynamic event. Some keys to good execution include the height of the top when executing her skill, the extension of the top off the bases, and again, before being caught, and the catch position.
And, of course, this is opening night for both of these top 15 squads in the nation, so just getting a feel for who's going to play what role. But given that they were just beginning their existence in 2024, this year is quite a bit more comfortable. And we'll take another quick break here from Brookville, New York. When we come back, second half action, Iona and LIU. And once again, welcome back inside the Prac Recreation Center. Miles Grossman alongside Jordan Sack, as we do have an update to your scoreboard there. You see Iona now narrowly ahead, 91.6 to 91.35. Of course, it was quite literally tied before, and Iona a very slim margin coming into the second half.
Absolutely, and before we head into this toss event, there's actually going to be... Excuse me. Both teams are actually going to have the same exact start values for each of these heats, so it's just going to get closer. And it's really just going to come down to who executes better.
So much more of the same is to be expected here with the 450 Salto heat to lead us off. That'll be a group of 5 students, and there's been some terminology that has maybe perplexed me a little bit, confused me a little bit, but 450 Salto heat is a term that I'd say maybe you're more familiar with than I.
Yes, so the 450 is actually, I would say the amount of spin. So the amount of degrees of spin, so you could have a full twisting of 1.5, or sometimes it can go forwards, it can go backwards. It really just depends on how they choose to do that 450 salto.
So once again, as they have throughout this evening, Iona will be out there first to lead us off.
And they are going to start with a 9.3.
So now our 4th event officially underway here in half number 2.
A really clean first heat by the Iona Gales there. From the entry to the catch, everything was very crisp, it was clean, and it was executed very well.
So great start to the second, no doubt.
Absolutely. And I should also mention for our viewers who are new to the sport, when we introduce each event, we say it's out of 30 possible points, and then we talk about those start values. So right here, Iona had a 9.3 start value. So that's the most possible points they can get on this heat. So if they start at a 9.3 and they get a 9.3, that was absolutely perfect, which is extremely rare. And as we said, a 10.0, which we've seen from both of these teams today, have actually maxed out that difficulty. But here, the highest score that Iona can get, and actually when we see the Sharks, they're going to start at 9.32. That is the highest score they can possibly get. I do have to say, as rare as that exact score was, before the pyramid heat, it's also extremely rare to see the exact same start values from both of these teams that aren't necessarily a 10.
Yeah, I hear that. And of course, both early in the year to young groups, maybe a little bit of that conservative attitude.
Absolutely. We've seen a lot of similarities throughout their skills here. I would say the most discrepancies that we've seen were actually in that acro heat. And I would say the pyramids were so similar, just with some differences out there.
So once again, satisfaction on the face of the LIU Sharks as they jog off. And now coming up, it'll be the synchronized heat.
Absolutely. And as we've noted before, timing is really going to be important here. And as we mentioned also, to touch upon those catches, the top needs to maintain that hollow body position. So as we talked about earlier in the pyramids, they want to be nearly flat. And catching too high or too low may result in a deduction. And the top also wants to be caught near the shoulders bases. So anything lower than the bases can result in a deduction as well. So for these synchronized tosses, Iona's actually going to start us off with a 9.4 start value. And as we mentioned before, the way that they are positioned on the mat could vary here. I'm excited to see what these coaches have come up with, but they can either face front right to the officials, they can face sideways toward the Sharks, or they can also face on that ankle to the corner.
And would you say if one squad faces off against the ref, that creates any sort of maybe more in the head of one team than the other pressure to also face the referee?
It absolutely could. Some coaches might not even think of starting one way, but then they might see another team do it. Maybe they get a really great score and they want to try it out. And also to note that the acro heat, the pyramid, the tosses, they can change from competition to competition. So you might have Iona's next meet, which I think is on Saturday. They could change up some of these skills as well. They don't have to perform the exact same things. The only heat that needs to be the same is that compulsory heat, which was the first four heats we saw of this competition. Really good job by Iona there for that synchronized heat. I saw a little bit of difference in the height, and then on this catch on our right, her feet were a little bit above her head, so I would say those could both be a little bit of a deduction. But otherwise, really great job.
So 2 very minor deductions possibly will lead way to an opportunity for the LIU Sharks, who find themselves in a very narrow deficit. Of course, the open heat, I'd imagine, will be the most pivotal of the toss events.
Absolutely. It's going to be the most pivotal, and as we mentioned earlier, it really comes down to execution. Because for both of these teams, their toss start values for each of these heats line up perfectly. So LIU, when they take the mat, is going to start off with a 9.4 as well.
And taking a look at the upcoming schedule for these LIU Sharks, they won't have much time off. They'll have to travel out to Waco, Texas to face a big name in the Baylor Bears before the Quinnipiac Bobcats come here to Brookville. I'm not sure. You said you won't be on the call. You'll just be here in attendance.
Yes. I will be here in attendance supporting both teams. You know, the LIU Sharks, their assistant coach, Nicolette Tianga, was also a former Quinnipiac alumni. Unfortunately, we didn't get to cross paths on the mat, but she was there, so I've gotten to watch her grow as an athlete and now as a coach as well.
And Tianga, Long Island native, if I'm not mistaken. Also has a national championship under her belt.
Absolutely. Nicolette was such a fierce base, and I'm so excited to see how she's transferring all that knowledge that she built up onto these LIU Sharks. She was such a great leader for Quinnipiac as well during her 4 years there. You know, it's really the great thing about the sport is being able to reconnect with everybody. I think for a year there, I actually was competing against Shelby when she was at Oregon, so it's really great to connect her, you know, actually finally meet her in person, which is something that sometimes you don't get to do. And then also being able to see Nicolette again, kind of see everything that she's brought to this team and just watch their creativity flow.
And I'd imagine with some of these, I don't know, I'll say lesser known sports as opposed to maybe basketball or football, there's going to be some more tight-knit, smaller communities.
Absolutely. It's even the Iona team, too. I watched Jackie coach year in and year out. She was one of the opposing coaches when I was on the competition floor as well, so seeing her now and being able to work alongside with her has just been great.
So Iona now will take the mat this time around. The open heat, 10 possible points. You just mentioned earlier, max score, I believe, 9.4 this time around?
Yes. Really great job for Iona there to close out this toss heat. You saw that toss there was a full twisting layout. Her body position in the air was great. Her feet were not crossed. They were glued together. And that catch was really solid. So little room for deductions there. So let's see what the Sharks have to bring to close out this toss heat.
We've seen Alyssa Lentz go in the air plenty of times today, and it really seems that she's really one of the more polished names out there, a California native here for Iona. I mean, what a rock to have if you're the Iona coaching staff.
Absolutely, and she's also an athlete that's created a name for herself throughout her entire career, and she just continues to do that event after event. And the Sharks here are going to take the mat to close it out for us with a 9.4 start value.
DiVincenzo, the name in the air. And the Sharks able to complete it, but maybe a little bit of an angle there, you'd say?
Yes, I would say that would be a little bit of a deduction. They were a little bit off center. So that is going to conclude that toss heat.
As you said, that's that for the toss event. We are through 4. We will take a quick break. When we come back, the tumbling event will be upon us. Of course, quite a bit to get into there when we come back. And back here inside the Pratt Recreation Center, Miles Grossman joined by Jordan Sack, a Quinnipiac alum. And, of course, getting into the tumbling event. And you said earlier the tumbling was one of your favorites. They'll start with the duo, followed by the trio, the quad, the aerial, the 6 element, and they'll wrap it up with the open. So, Jordan, no doubt about it, a lot of points available here in the tumbling.
Absolutely, and with this tumbling event, you are going to see a combination of synchronized group tumbling, which is going to be that duo, trio, and quad, and some individual passes as well. So that duo pass is going to be 2 athletes that need to sync up, trios 3, and the 4 is the quad. So that's where that difficulty is really going to come into play, because you're adding more athletes that need to time, need to have similar level of difficulty, and also need to execute it well. And then you'll get into those individual passes where you're going to see some of the stars of both of these teams actually competing out on that mat. So some of these student athletes can compete in both synchronized and individual, but they can only tumble once in each section. So if you can be in the duo pass and you can be in one of the individual passes, but you cannot be in the duo and the trio. And then you can also not have 2 individual passes. So that also makes it more difficult, because you need to, really look at the vault of difficulty and skill that you have within your team. So we're going to get right into this tumbling event. Iona's going to start us off, and they're going to do their duo pass with a 9.75 start value. You can see Iona is fired up about that duo pass. That pass they just completed there was a round off, 2 whip backs, 2 back handsprings, and a full and a half twist. So a whip back, for our viewers who aren't necessarily familiar with the gymnastics language, is actually a back handspring with no hands. So their hands are not touching the floor. So the more of those skills that you combine together without your hands touching the floor, the more difficult the pass gets.
So Iona certainly seemed to set the bar awfully high here for the Sharks. And one thing's for sure, the Gales have really come into Long Island and brought their own energy with them.
Absolutely. And sometimes the tumbling event is where you actually see the most deductions from those officials, because so many skills that you need to fit on this 9-panel mat. So within saying that, some deductions you could see is if an athlete steps off the mat at the end of their pass, that could be a deduction. But they are allowed to begin their pass off the mat. So as you saw those 2 athletes from Iona, they started on those practice mats there, which are not a deduction.
Of course, by the time they're on the mat, they're picked up quite a bit of momentum at that point.
Absolutely. So the Sharks are going to take the mat for their duo pass now, and their start value is going to be an 8.35. Really good execution by those Sharks there. I would say timing was really, really good, because that's also something in these synchronized passes that the officials are looking for. A really clean pass by both of those athletes.
So is Logan Lombardi on one side. Didn't catch the number on the other, but of course these LIU Sharks certainly hold serve here as they trail by just 2 points here early in the tumbling event.
Absolutely, and those Sharks just performed a round off. Another one of those whipbacks, as we mentioned, but just one. That's a little bit of a difference between the Sharks and Iona here, and they did 2 back handsprings to a full twisting layout. So we are going to move on to this trio pass here, and Iona's going to take the mat shortly, and they're going to start at a 9.55. So some of the deductions the officials are going to look for here, besides the timing and besides landing on that mat, is really the execution of the skills, the continuity of the skills.
So it's Mia Vanden Elsen on the left side, Alyssa Lentz in the center, and then rounding it out on the far right will be Ty Upton, really the big 3 for these Gales here in 2025.
Absolutely. These are 3 names that you've heard and you've seen so many times today.
So it looked like Ty Upton was a little bit of a trailer there, but in general, pretty well executed.
Absolutely. That pass that you just saw there was a front handspring, front tuck step out, round off back handspring 1.5. And when we talk about the continuity, what the officials are looking for is making sure when you come out of that front tuck here, specifically in that pass, that there's no pause, there's no stop. You want to make sure everything's moving smoothly throughout the entire pass. And also, I know we had our athlete all the way towards the back of the mat that had a little bit of a bigger step and a bobble at the end. That could also be a deduction, depending on the degree of that step. So each athlete and coach, if they would like to, they can submit within their big file that they submit before the competition, which lays out what's every single skill that's going to be performed and the athletes that are going to be performing them, so they can't switch it before the competition. And that also gives a little bit of a layout for the officials, because when you're looking at here, you're looking at so many diverse skills and so many things on that mat happening at once. So that really does help the officials. So within that, they know every single athlete that's going to be going and their jersey number. And if it's a different athlete comparable to what they have there, that could be a deduction as well. But within that, for tumbling specifically, the deductions there could also be with those steps. They need to designate a step at the end. So they can either land with 2 feet together, and they can designate that, or they can allow them to have a step at the end. But the step needs to be controlled to be deductionless.
I see. So Anaya Trippett rounds us out on the right side. In the center will be the Vegas native, Taylor Jackson. And then on the far left, once again, looks to be Lombardi, or check that. It's going to be Ferry.
Really great pass by the Sharks. Their start value there was an 8.0, and they did round off back handsprings with a full twisting layout.
So certainly looked to be much more conservative that time around for the Sharks.
Yes. Even though they are being a little bit more conservative with their tumbling, I would say that their tumbling looks extremely clean, which also helps with the officials and the scores there. And another thing to note too is you saw Iona's last pass completed facing those Sharks. So as we talked about, that designated step has to be forwards. If it goes backwards, that's a deduction. So for here, we just saw those Sharks with the round off back handspring fulls, that their step went backwards because that's where the pass was. So within the designation of the step, there should be no deductions, but if it was a little bit too big or uncontrolled for the officials, that's where they'll take off.
And it seemed to be 3 pretty under control LIU Sharks that time around. As now we'll head to the quad. 4 student athletes, of course, got to be synchronized.
Absolutely, and Iona is going to start with an 8.75 here. So you're actually going to see a little bit of a difference here with these athletes. You have one athlete actually starting on those warm-up mats, and the other 3 athletes competing are actually starting on the hardwood in between the practice mats and the competition floor.
And from your angle, you'd assume the reasoning for that staggering would be?
Some people just need a little bit more room to run. You know, some people like to, put a little bit more power into that. Some people like to have a little bit more control into their skills, so it's really up to that athlete's discretion. So, but the trick here is that even if they're starting at different, places on the floor, they have to make sure that they're synced up. They don't have to be exactly in line, but they need to make sure that their timing's exactly the same. And I would say their timing looks pretty good to me.
No doubt about that. So Iona continues what's been a very polished opening to 2025. And now LIU will have to answer, of course, with the quad.
Absolutely. And their quad is actually going to be an 8.75 start value as well. So once again, identical start values here for both Iona and the Sharks in this tumbling event.
Lila Campbell-Steffen in the middle there towards the left side. McKenna Guidish is on the far left. And then on the right, Jalen Wright. And rounding it out will be Christina DiVincenzo. DiVincenzo, I should say, the Bethpage native. And that's got to be the same Bethpage as Bethpage Black, the golf course?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Yes, that golf course actually is Bethpage, and it's right on the border of Farmingdale as well, so it's kind of right in between there.
Of course, growing up in Southern California, that name Bethpage was only associated with U.S. Open golf.
Really great job there by the Sharks. You saw a little bit of an uncontrolled step there by the third athlete, but other than that, really great job to close out the synchronized portion of our tumbling heat. So now we are going to get into these individual passes.
And it looked to be Jalen Wright, who was the name who was just looking to find her footing, the Kansas City, Missouri native. As we will move forward on to, as you said, the first look at the individual pass. One salto before final salto in pass, of course. And this one a little bit more difficult, I assume, just being that individual set.
Absolutely. So you need to have one of those saltos per se, one of those skills before the final skill in that pass. So that is why they call it the aerial pass. And Iona is going to start us off here with a 9.65 start value. So also something so important to know about this tumbling heat is that this is not a spring floor. These athletes are tumbling on a dead mat. So any athlete that comes from power tumbling or comes from gymnastics or cheerleading, there's springs there to help those athletes. But here there are no springs. So that just goes to show the strength of these athletes and the skill and everything that comes along with that as well, which is extremely impressive.
Yeah, every ounce of momentum you have to create yourself. There's no one else out there to help you. And just based on, from this angle, you'd assume there were some pretty powerful springboards in there.
Yes, from watching these athletes tumble, you would assume that they had so many springs under them, but it's actually just the athletes themselves, as you said, giving them the momentum.
Really impressive that time. Moving right to left was Alyssa Lentz, their top tumbler.
Absolutely. That was such a dynamic pass from Alyssa. You saw a combination of so many different skills there. You saw some front skills, you saw some back skills, and then you also saw some twisting skills to close out the pass.
Wentz last year was a key contributor, really known for her versatility, but particularly her tumbling as well. And of course, when you have the addition of the transfer and Ty Upton, you kind of have that star-studded 1-2 punch.
Absolutely. You have two athletes that give you so much difficulty here that have joined this team and really have taken Iona, I would say, to a new level in their only 2-year career here. So number 42 is going to take the mat, and she is going to have a start value of a 9.55.
So McKenna Gaidish, the Surrey, British Columbia native, makes her way down from Canada. Just a first year, stands at 5'4". And of course, quite a bit of pressure on her shoulders now.
Okay, a little bit of a mistake there, but other than that, a really good pass. So you did see that she did take a few steps out of the end of that pass, and then she did touch her hands to the floor. So that is going to be a significant deduction there.
And of course, Guidish just a first year in a really difficult spot. She's got quite a few years left to grow into those high leverage positions.
Absolutely. And I have no doubt that she will be improving that pass.
So now we'll head to the sixth element here, just that sole individual pass. Once again, a lot of weight on a sole individual shoulder, a lot of eyes on you as well. It's just, you get that feeling when there's one person on the mat, a lot of eyes on you.
Absolutely, and this sixth element, as we've noticed, there was a sixth element acro heat, and now we have a sixth element tumbling pass. So you cannot have more than 6 elements in this pass. So 6 skills, and that's all you get to increase that difficulty here. which is extremely difficult. And this sixth element for Iona is going to start at a 10.0.
And not too sure just yet, but I'd imagine it's going to be Ty Upton out there, the junior transfer. Was coached by Jackie Eshelman back at Gannon, and then when she took over the program here as the Iona Gales head coach, Upton was certainly a player on her radar, and here she is.
Really incredible pass by Ty Upton there. As you saw, for being a little bit nitpicky, there was a little bit of the lack of continuity coming out of that salto in the middle, but other than that, really, really great pass by Ty. And a 10.0 start value. So as we mentioned, she's only allowed to do 6 elements, and she maxed out that score. And as you also saw, she started from the side of the mat, whereas her teammate Alyssa started from the corner.
Mm-hmm.
That is up to the athlete and the coach's discretion wherever they want to start on that mat. Similar to the individual passes, but now, similar to those synchronized passes, but now they have the option of starting from that corner. So to go into a little bit more detail about that lack of continuity for people that aren't familiar with it. So as you saw in her pass, she did a front hand, she did a whip back right into an Arabian. And when she came out of that Arabian, she had a little bit of a pause there, a little bit of a stutter, I would say. So that would mean there was a halt in the slowly moving pass, which could be a deduction.
And there's such speed we've seen throughout. It did just seem like a little bit of a lack of rhythm for a moment.
Yes, that is a perfect way to describe that.
But LIU the other way, once again, Lila Campbell-Steffen, another Canadian tumbler.
Absolutely, and that pass that she just performed actually started at a 9.55. So a little bit of a difference there in the start values, but both great passes.
So safe to say, early throughout the individual bouts, it's been Iona sort of growing their narrow margin at the moment. Came in 118 to 116, of course, and some change on each side. But safe to say, the Gales have had the upper hand over the last few moments.
Absolutely, and we are getting ready to close out this tumbling event here with the open pass. So this is a pass that has no requirements, So once again, up to the coach's discretion, up to the creativity of the athlete that's going to perform this pass. And
didn't mean to cut you off there, but we had already seen, of course, the two really top names for Iona in Alyssa Lentz and then Ty Upton. So now, if I'm not mistaken, of course, this is going to have to be a third name.
Yes, it is. And I'm excited to see who it's going to be. And this athlete is going to start with a 9.75.
So Olivia Montalbano, 5'2" out of Washington Township, New Jersey. Just a sophomore. And absolutely no lack of rhythm there. Super continuous. And she's fired up.
Absolutely. Olivia just performed such an incredible pass. This is a pass that we saw Iona actually compete in their synchronized heat as well. So it was a round off with 2 whip backs, 2 back handsprings, and a 1.5 to close it out.
So here we are. It'll be LIU's final opportunity here at the individual pass, the open individual pass before the team event.
Absolutely. And the Sharks are going to start here to 9.25.
So a little bit, tad more modest as opposed to Olivia Montalbano. So Logan Lombardi, another Long Island native. Originally attended the University of Kentucky, so a high pedigree name. But now just a sophomore in a big spot here on opening night as they host the Iona Gales.
Really great job by that athlete there. She had a little bit of a deep squat at the end of her pass, which is going to be a deduction, but other than that, really clean and a great pass.
As you said, for the most part, a really solid run there for Lombardi. That takes us to the close of the tumbling event, pardon me. When we come back, it will be the team event with all the marbles on the line. Don't go anywhere. Iona, LIU, here on NEC Front Row. So most of the evening has been neck and neck, and we are headed to the final event of our night together, the team event with 110 points on the line. Of course, 24 student athletes, a maximum of 24 student athletes for each side, with many, many required elements. And of course, according to my color man tonight, Jordan Sack, it's going to be a lot of controlled chaos out there. And Jordan, why don't you break it down for us? What should we expect to see in the team event?
Absolutely. So everything that we've seen thus far leading up to this incredible team event, you're going to see in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. So there's going to be 30 acro elements. There's going to be 5 tosses, 4 pyramids, 21 standing tumbling passes, 21 running tumbling passes. Then you're also going to see a little bit of a dance there at the end. So everything that we just saw, all these incredible athletes, all the incredible skills that they've performed, they're going to put into a quick 2 minutes and 45 seconds, as I mentioned. It is going to be to music. The music is, there are no specific requirements by the NCATA committee. It is really the coach's discretion, and really a lot of that music puts in there really gets those athletes amped up, really gets them ready to go, and gives them the highest level of confidence that they can possibly bring. Because this is a really high pressure event, the most high pressure that you're going to see throughout an acrobatics and tumbling competition.
And you can imagine they've heard that song quite a bit throughout the preparation. It means a lot to them as well.
Absolutely. And it's going to contain required skills, and there's also going to be some optional skills in there. And their start value is based off the difficulties of all the skills that are selected there. So all the acro, all the tosses, pyramids, and tumbling, that's where the start value is based from.
So we're yet to get a recent score update. As we have it, 118, 116. In a moment, we'll include, of course, the tumbling event difference. But as it stands, it's safe to say coming into the team event, everything's on the line for both these squads. It's going to come down to the results of the team event.
Absolutely. And we, as viewers, we are going to let you guys watch this 2 minutes and 45 seconds of organized chaos, and then we will see you right after that.
So there you have it. The Iona Gales night is in the books. Ahead of the team competition, we do have an updated number for you, 172.7. And Jordan, their night's over, but that was a pretty impressive finish.
That absolutely was, and as I mentioned, that organized and controlled chaos is exactly what you just saw there. There were so many things that were happening, but a few highlights here. I thought the routine was so clean. I think the judges would agree with that. And there was also, I would say, one big mistake in that back left corner where one of the elements did come down, and I did see one step off the mat in that tumbling run, but other than that, really, really great job. And to also note, these officials now have kind of changed where they're officiating. So you see there's 9 panels on the mat, so you have one official that's going to look at the far left 3 panels, official who's going to look at the middle 3, and then that other official who's going to look at the right 3 panels. So that changes it up a little bit, which also gives the coaches, as we mentioned, a little bit of discretion on where to place all the elements on the mat. So they're going to take their advantages there with knowing that sometimes they could place a bunch of elements, as long as they're not blocking each other, in those right 3 panels, so one official has to officiate every single one of those.
I hear that. And, of course, with 110 points on the line for the team event, a 7-point margin on the scoreboard, safe to say any given day, 7 points will separate 2 team routines.
Absolutely. And Iona started here with a 101.75. So they're really only 9 points away from that maximum possible score of a 110, which is extremely incredible and extremely impressive, especially for a second-year team here. With the amount of diversity you saw within those skills as well. I know we mentioned they started out with a lot of standing tumbling. You saw multiple athletes tumbling once, tumbling twice, and then we went into a lot of those acro elements, those pyramids, and then we had 2 big running tumbling sequences, as you saw there. And also, this really goes to the stamina of all of these athletes. So you could be completing one of those really hard running tumbling passes, but then you're going right into a controlled pyramid or right into an acro element. So it just goes to show how poised these athletes have to be on that mat.
And I imagine the choreography is, of course, the majority of what's going on here. Shelby Armstrong, it's her first look at a choreographed team event here in year 2, and her team has looked pretty polished so far. It's really something going to be on display. Just see what her head coach has, what she's rocking with moving forward early in the year.
Absolutely, and choreography is such a big thing too, because there are rules that the coaches need to follow, because you can't have one skill blocking another skill. So in order to position everything on the mat perfectly like we talked about, but also fit all of those skills in, is really, really important. But also, and little things to kind of keep that advantage with the officials. So that is such an important job, and these coaches are so skilled at it, and they grow each and every year when it comes to choreographing these routines. Not even that. You got to fit all those elements in there.
Yeah.
And you also need to fit up to 24 athletes on 9 panels of mat. So just those little things make it so much more difficult, but really just so the creativity and the evolution of this sport.
So the choreography of Shelby Armstrong on display, the talent of the LIU Sharks, the final 2:45 about set to get underway as they look to close this 7-point gap and a little bit of change.
Absolutely, and your Sharks are going to start at a 99.24 for their team event, and we will see you in about 2 minutes and 45 seconds.
So that'll be that for the LIU Sharks. I believe some Soulja Boy in there even at the end, but they'll look to close that small 7-point gap. And look, Jordan, it looked to me like there was a little bit of a lapse around that 1 minute gap in the center, but the LIU Sharks still gave themselves a chance.
Absolutely. There were 2 major falls there in that pyramid section, which is going to be a little bit more of a costly deduction. And then I did see 1 tumbling fall, which is going to be a little bit more of a deduction than any extra steps or any hops that we've mentioned earlier. But other than that, a really, really great routine by the Sharks there.
So the LIU Sharks will have their first meet in the books under second-year head coach Shelby Armstrong. Of course, we'll wait and get our final score for you in just a few minutes. And to the naked eye, Jordan, I'd assume Iona had the narrow edge in that final event.
Absolutely. You know, everything comes down to those officials and what they see on that mat. But I would agree with you. I think with that 7-point lead and a few mistakes the Sharks had might go in Iona's favor there. But from both teams for their opening competitions here, I think they both had really, really great performances and are absolutely going to look to improve coming the rest of their season because it is a long season and it's just starting out today. So much to look forward to for both of these second-year teams.
Yeah, there was a lot to like for each head coach. Shelby Armstrong, of course, a lot of similarities as opposed to her counterpart tonight in Jackie Eshelman. But 2 second-year head coaches just looking to find that polished product in year 2. Already 2 top 15 programs in the nation per the preseason coaches poll. And at the moment, it does seem like the number 8 squad in the country, the Iona Gales, is homing in on their first win of 2025. Taking a look at their schedule coming up in just a little bit. They'll have some time off. As we know, the LIU Sharks will travel out to Waco, Texas. And for this Gales squad as well, they won't have too much time off. Shuffling through my notes here, trying to get it for you.
Absolutely. And that preseason coaches poll, they will actually do another poll towards the end of the season before those national championship rankings come out.
So it'll actually be a matchup against your alma mater, Quinnipiac, this upcoming Saturday. For those Iona Gales out in New Rochelle, they'll be hosting a top squad in the country. So it does not get much easier having to face those Bobcats.
Absolutely. And you have the Quinnipiac Bobcats and Baylor, which are actually ranked number 1 and 2. So both of these second-year teams are actually, going to go out and compete against 2 really high-ranked teams who have both already had competitions under their belt as well.
So once again, just waiting for that final scorekeeping update down below. Entering that team event, it was a 7-point margin, 7 and change, I believe, 7.7 points to be exact, the Iona Gales. And you can see still some conversations taking place down below between those judges.
Absolutely. And to note again, for any of our viewers that are watching today and are really excited about the sport, want to learn more, or want to look to be a student athlete, a coach, an official, please visit the NCATA.org. You can find them on social media. You can also visit them on the website and learn so much more about this incredible sport and even the teams themselves.
No doubt about that. A relatively young sport in the grand scheme, of course, but grows every single year here in the NCAA.
Absolutely. And we've been talking about these coaches polls and these rankings. So the top 8 teams make it to the national championship, which is going to be hosted in South Dakota, if I'm correct, this year. And that will be at the end of April. So these teams have so much to look forward to for the rest of the season, but also going to be fighting to be one of those top 8 teams.
And, of course, in the preseason poll, Iona was slated to be one of those top 8, but they have a very difficult schedule. As we said, a top 15 team in LIU today, Quinnipiac, top 2 next time, Duquesne, number 15 in the nation, followed by Mary Hardin Baylor, a top 5 squad, and then the Baylor Bears, they'll face off, followed by the Oregon Ducks. So nothing but top competition on the schedule for the 2025 year in New Rochelle. And quite frankly, this is one of their easier contests. When you take a look at it, almost every other meet is going to be against the top 5.
Absolutely, and that is extremely difficult to do, but also it's a really big hats off to the Iona Gales. They've in the 2 years that they've competed, they've really solidified themselves in those top spots and looking to compete against those top competitors.
No doubt about that. And as we said throughout the broadcast, Jackie Eshelman has a lot to do with that in year 2. Founded the program here to start last year, and now preseason top 10. Really done a great job of establishing themselves amongst the nation's elite, including some really powerful athletic, really just general powerhouses in Oregon and Baylor, teams that might have a lot more funding, a lot more notoriety. And it's nice to see LIU and Iona, some mid-majors, getting in on the action as well.
Absolutely.
So once again, still just waiting for our final score from the judges down below. It was the LIU Sharks trying to close that gap in the team event. As we said in the booth, it didn't look like they got the job done, but not too sure. We'll get a final word in just a few moments. And Jordan, this has been quite an impressive evening for both second-year head coaches. While LIU maybe had a few moments of not looking as polished down the stretch, there's a lot to like for an early season meeting.
Absolutely. You know, as we've talked about numerous times, it is only the first meet of a very long season. So these teams have so much to be proud of today, but also if I know both of these coaches, they are going to celebrate their competition today, but also tomorrow they're going right back to the drawing board to see where they can improve and really where they can either increase their difficulty or maybe just clean some things up for the rest of the season. You know, we talked a lot about the strength of these athletes and the versatility. That goes into a lot of their preseason training, which is strength and conditioning coaches, which is nutritionists, which is really focusing on everything that comes into this sport. So it's really big shout out to all those people who make this possible, you know, including the event staff here today and all, especially those coaches and those athletes.
It looks like we have our score.
Iona with an 85.85.
So there you have it. The Iona Gales will take it by a margin of just about 30 points there. So a great road victory to kick off the campaign in year 2 for Jackie Eshelman.
Absolutely, and so excited for what these teams are going to have to offer for the rest of the seasons.
So check that math, pardon me, 258 to 239 and some change, about a 20-point victory for the Iona Gales.
Absolutely. And as we mentioned before, anybody interested, please visit that website and the social media for the NCATA.
So special thank you to Jordan Sack. You've been wonderful, really amazing to work with you. Our producer, Nick Faria, been with us all night here from Brookville, New York. A big win to start off 2025 for the Iona.